The void at the edge of the Valdrax system held nothing. According to every sensor aboard the Crithian picket ship Spear of Twilight, the patch of space 400 kilometers off the starboard bow was empty. And that was the problem. Pilot Officer Sereth tapped his console. Empty space should produce a reading. Background radiation, stellar wind, the faint hum of distant gravitic tides. This patch returned nothing at all. Absence shaped like absence. "Run diagnostics," Captain Vorn ordered from the command perch. His long limbs curled around the brass rails. The Crithians were a graceful species, tall and reed-thin, and Vorn wore his command shawl like a man who expected to retire decorated. "If our sensors are failing, we will be the laughter of the fleet." "Diagnostics nominal, Captain. The instruments are working. Space itself is," Sereth searched for the word, "wrong." The Spear of Twilight was a picket. A fast scout, lightly armed, meant for observation. The Valdrax system was contested space, currently under Crithian Dominion claim despite 4 lesser polities filing protests. One of those protests had come from Earth. The Dominion had filed it under nuisance and forgotten it. Humans were a young species, barely 2 centuries spacefaring by Dominion reckoning. Their navy was a curiosity. Their diplomats were earnest. Their warnings were unworthy of council time. "Sir, the absence is growing." Vorn rose from his perch and crossed the narrow bridge. He looked at the screen. The patch of unread space had widened to nearly a kilometer across. Then 2. Then 4. "What is it?" Vorn demanded. "I do not know." "Hail it." "Hail what, Captain?" Vorn's mandibles clicked, a Crithian expression of unease he did not bother to suppress. "Hail the absence." Sereth opened a broadband channel. Standard greetings in 3 trade tongues. The absence offered no reply. It only kept growing. A hole in the fabric of measurable reality, drifting closer with the patient inevitability of a tide coming in. At 9 kilometers across, the absence shimmered. The Crithian bridge crew watched transfixed as the empty space began to refuse to be empty. Sensors that had reported nothing now reported too much. Massachusetts energy. Structural lattice. Drive signatures. Weapons emissions. All flooding in at once, as if a curtain had been pulled aside on a stage that had never been empty at all. "Captain," Sereth whispered, "mass reading is—" "Speak it." 9 million tons. Configured for warfare. Vorn's mandibles locked. 9 million tons was not a frigate. It was not a cruiser. It was a capital ship of a class the Dominion's own shipyards struggled to assemble. The shimmer firmed into hull, long, dark, built in flat planes and harsh angles, painted in matte gray that drank the light of the distant primary. Along its flank, white characters in a script the Crithians had been taught to dismiss as a backwater scribble. Defiant cause. Beneath that, in smaller script, Terran Unified Navy. The Spear of Twilight had been built for observation, but it carried a standard weapons load. Sereth's hand hovered over the alert. Vorn did not speak the order. He did not yet know what kind of order was needed. The Dominion picket's communications array chirped. Incoming transmission. Voice only. The voice that filled the bridge was steady. Human male. Spoken in Crithian trade tongue with no accent at all, which was its own form of warning. Crithian vessel Spear of Twilight. This is Captain Elias Thorne of the Terran dreadnought Defiant Cause. The Valdrax system is under disputed claim. Your continued military presence here is unlawful. You will withdraw your forces from this system within 1 standard hour. After that hour, I will begin removing them. Silence on the bridge. Sereth turned to look at his captain. Vorn had not moved. "Acknowledge the transmission," Thorne's voice continued. "I require confirmation that you have heard me." Vorn found his voice. "Earthship. You are alone. You are far from your borders. You are speaking of war." "I am speaking of consequences," Captain Thorne said. "There is a difference." The channel closed. Vorn stood for a long while, looking at the dark wall of the human dreadnought filling his viewport. Then he gave the order to call the fleet. The hour began. The Crithian fleet did not yet exist in the Valdrax system, not in force. The Dominion had stationed 3 frigate squadrons and a cruiser flotilla 2 jumps away, under the assumption that nothing would happen here that demanded more than a picket and a flag. The flag had been planted. The picket had been posted. Empire was supposed to be about confidence. Captain Vorn sent the emergency burst. Fleet Command would receive it in 35 minutes. Reinforcements could not arrive in less than 4 hours. The Spear of Twilight was a picket, alone with a dreadnought, and the dreadnought had set a clock. "Captain," said his weapons officer, a young Crithian, freshly commissioned, her crest still bright with the dyes of her academy. "Your orders." Vorn did not look away from the grey hull filling his forward port. "We hold position. We do not provoke. The Earthship is bluffing." "Sir," she said carefully, "the mass reading—" "I see the mass reading. 9 million tons. The Devourer-class flagships of our own line are 7. Vorn turned. "Then we have learned something useful for the report. Hold position." The hour passed. The clock did not. The galaxy had learned, over 4 centuries of cataloging the species of the local arm, certain truths about humans. Humans were short-lived. Humans were emotional. Humans were divided into many feuding polities and could rarely agree on anything. Humans had only recently mastered fold drives. Humans built ships, yes, but the ships were small, their weapons modest, their armor thin. The Crithian Dominion had observed them politely and dismissed them firmly. The Crithian Dominion had never seen the dark side of an entire civilization that had been listening to the polite dismissal and writing it down. In the final minute of the hour, Captain Vorn ordered weapons to stand by. He did not order them to fire. He was not a fool. He had served 32 years in the Dominion fleet and had seen too many empires fall to know that the loud chest-beating of small ships in the face of unknowns was the briefest of careers. He waited. The hour expired. The Defiant Cause's broadband opened. Captain Thorne's voice returned, the same steady tone. "The hour has passed. I see your forces have not withdrawn. I will now begin removing them. Crithian Vessel Spear of Twilight, you are an observer. Your withdrawal at this moment will be honored." "Confirm." Vorn did not hesitate. "Confirmed. Spear of Twilight is withdrawing." "Acknowledged. Safe transit." The picket turned and ran. Sereth was screaming the engines to full burn before the order had fully left Vorn's mouth. The bridge crew watched their rear sensors with the unblinking focus of those who understood that survival now depended on distance. They had been clear of the system for 14 minutes when the first Crithian cruiser flotilla arrived. It arrived in formation, 8 warships under the command of Flotilla Captain Vashanth, an officer of the old school who had received Vorn's burst transmission and decided that the proper response was not caution but immediate force projection. Vashanth had read the report of an Earthship in Dominion space and had laughed. He brought his flotilla into Valdrak at battle stations, weapons charged. He opened a channel to the human dreadnought before he even cleared his exit signature. "Earth Captain. I am Flotilla Captain Vashanth of the Dominion Fleet. You are intruders in sovereign space. Lower your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or you will be destroyed." There was a pause on the channel. Then Captain Thorne's voice returned, steady as ever, with the addition now of something else. The dry edge of a man who had heard many threats over a long career and had grown tired of the script. "Flotilla Captain. You have entered the system at battle stations. I will treat that as your answer. The Defiant Cause is now releasing weapons hold." Vashanth began to laugh. He was still laughing when the first kinetic strike crossed the distance between the ships in less time than his sensors could register the launch, punched through his flagship's forward shielding as if the shielding were a courtesy, and erased his command bridge from the universe. The laughter ended mid-breath. Across the Valdrak system, war had begun. The Defiant Cause did not look like a ship designed for theater. It looked like a ship designed for work. Its hull was flat where it could be flat, angled where it had to be angled. Its weapons batteries did not project the sweeping curves favored by Crithian shipwrights. Earth had designed her for a single purpose, to fight a war the galaxy did not yet know existed. In the seconds after Flotilla Captain Vashanth's flagship lost its bridge, the surviving 7 cruisers reacted with the trained discipline of veteran crews. They spread to disperse targeting solutions. They opened plasma batteries at maximum range. They launched torpedo swarms in coordinated waves. The Crithian Dominion fleet doctrine had been refined over 5 centuries of conflict against rivals of similar tonnage and similar tools. The doctrine assumed a fair fight. The fight was not fair. Plasma washed across the Defiant Cause's flank in 3 coordinated lances. The hull drank the energy. The armor was a layered composite developed in laboratories Earth had refused to publish papers on, reactive, adaptive, designed to channel incoming heat into capacitor reserves that fed the kinetic launchers. The Defiant Cause used the plasma to charge her guns. Captain Elias Thorne stood in the center of his command deck, hands clasped behind his back, watching the engagement plot update. His first officer, Commander Iris Hauerin, called firing solutions in a voice trained to remove every emotion from every syllable. Targets 2 and 3. Kinetic solution locked. Launch authority requested. Granted. The Defiant Cause's launchers were not guns in the traditional sense. They were rails. They accelerated tungsten carbide slugs to a meaningful fraction of light speed and released them. The slugs did not need warheads. The slugs were warheads. A pellet the size of a clenched fist, moving at that velocity, carried the energy of a small fusion weapon and required no detonation to deliver it. Cruiser 2 ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next. The slug entered her port flank and left through her starboard, and everything in between was no longer arranged in the configuration of a ship. Cruiser 3's commanding officer made the correct decision in the wrong moment. He ordered evasive maneuvers. He had been trained to dodge plasma. He had not been trained to dodge things he could not see coming. The second slug punched her engineering deck. The third went through her bridge. The fourth was unnecessary but had already been launched, and so it took her amidships and ended the question. In 11 seconds, 3 Crithian cruisers were debris. The remaining 4 broke. They turned and ran for the system's edge. Thorne let them go. Commander Hauerin glanced at him. "Sir." "Let them carry the report," Thorne said. "We want it spreading." "Understood." Across the system, the Crithian frigate squadrons, now arriving from their forward base in the wake of Vashantha's distress call, stopped their advance. Their commanders had been listening on open channels. They had heard the laughter end. They had seen the debris field on their sensors. They held position and called Fleet Command for further orders. Fleet Command did not answer for 41 minutes. Fleet Command was, by that point, in an emergency session. The Defiant Cause held her position in the Valdrax system. Her hull cooled. Her capacitors recharged. Her crew, 2,200 strong, moved through their stations with the discipline of people who had trained for this engagement and were aware, with quiet pride, that they had not yet been required to use any of the harder tools available to them. On the command deck, Thorne turned to Commander Hauerin. "Status of the cloak." "Stable, sir. Ready to redeploy on order." "Hold us decloaked. The galaxy needs to see the ship that did this." Hauerin nodded. "And the others? They wait. They've been waiting for years. A little longer won't hurt them." In the Crithian capital, 3 star systems away, a senior intelligence officer was being shown a captured visual of the Defiant Cause's hull markings. He stared at the white letters. Terran Unified Navy. He had read every report the Dominion had ever filed on the human polity. None of them had mentioned a navy of this scale. None of them had mentioned a navy at all, in the operational sense. He picked up his secure line. "Get me the council," he said. "Get me the council now." The council of the local arm convened an emergency session within the hour. It had been convened in emergency session 4 times in its 5-century history. Once for the Virexian plague. Once for the collapse of the Delpha trade routes. Once for the Kroth Ascension crisis. Now for the 4th time, because of a single ship that should not have existed. The chamber was a wide amphitheater of pale stone, ringed by the delegations of the 13 recognized member polities. The Crithian Dominion occupied the largest gallery, as befitted the dominant naval power of the region. Earth's delegation occupied a small gallery at the rear, the one traditionally reserved for observer states with no voting rights, no permanent committee assignments, and no business interrupting their betters. Earth's delegation seat had been empty for the last 6 sessions. The Council had taken note. The Council had filed it as evidence of human disengagement. Today, the seat was filled. Ambassador Yen Ti, a delegate of the small Delpha Confederation, the last surviving senior diplomat of the trade route generation, rose from his bench as soon as the session was gavelled open. Yen Ti was old. His scales had paled to the soft cream of his species' elders, and he walked with a cane carved from coral. He had been speaking warnings about humanity for 32 years. The council had grown to tolerate him as a curiosity. "Honored colleagues," Yen Ti began. His voice carried in the chamber because the chamber had been built to carry voices. "I have before this body on 27 separate occasions raised concerns about our collective assessment of the Terran polity. On 27 occasions, I have been received with patience and dismissed with politeness. I will not waste the Chamber's time today reciting those concerns. They are in the record. I ask only that the record be opened, and that the Chamber consider whether the events in Valdrak require us to revisit them." The Crithian delegation chief, High Speaker Thravanes, rose without waiting for recognition. "The events in Valdrak are an act of war by a rogue Earth captain operating in violation of every treaty of this body. We are not here to revisit our assessments. We are here to authorize a response." "Speaker Thravanes," Yen Ti said, "before you authorize the response, I would ask you to consider what response is possible." The chamber stirred. Thravanes's mandibles clicked. "What is that meant to imply?" "It is meant to imply," Yen Ti said, "that the Terran polity has been preparing for this day for a length of time that exceeds the lifespans of most of the delegates in this room. I would advise the chamber to listen before it acts." He sat down. In the rear gallery, the human ambassador rose. Her name was Myra Vass. She was a small woman by human reckoning, with iron-gray hair cut blunt at her shoulders, wearing a dark suit that bore no markings of rank. She had served in the Earth Diplomatic Corps for 33 years. The Council had met her exactly 5 times. They had not retained her name. "I would like to address the chamber," she said. "You are an observer," Thravanes snapped. "You have no speaking privileges in an emergency session." "Speaker Thravanes." Vass's voice was calm. "You may make that ruling. I would only point out, in the interest of accurate record-keeping, that the Defiant Cause is one of 60 ships of her class currently deployed throughout this Council's territory. The others are not in Valdrak. The others are in your supply depots. The others are at the staging yards of Threv Prime. The others are above the home worlds of every delegation represented in this room." The chamber went still in a way that no rhetoric had achieved in 5 centuries. Vass waited a measured moment. "They are not yet decloaked. Captain Thorn is the only one of his peers with current orders to be visible. Whether the others remain in concealment is a question the Council will answer in the next 10 minutes. She sat down. Thravanes stared at the human ambassador. Then he looked at Yen Ti. Then he looked at the empty space above his own head, the space where, if Vass was telling the truth, a dreadnought was currently concealed. Behind him, his communications aide leaned in and whispered. The intelligence officer's report had arrived. Thravanes read it. His mandibles did not click. They stilled. The council session did not so much continue as collapse. For 12 minutes, no delegation spoke with confidence. The Crithian aide's report passed from hand to hand. Other intelligence chiefs were summoned from their offices and brought into the chamber. Their reports overlapped. Their reports confirmed each other. Across Dominion-controlled space, anomalous mass readings had appeared in the orbital approaches of 22 major systems within the last 8 hours. Local commanders had filed the readings as sensor faults. The faults had not cleared. Ambassador Vass watched in silence. Yen Ti watched her. Thravanes stared at his slate. Grand Admiral Vectisol was not in the chamber. He was 3 star systems away aboard his flagship, the Pride of Threv, and he had been monitoring the council session by encrypted relay. The Pride of Threv was a fortress, 2 kilometers from prow to engine bell, 28 main batteries, a crew of 11,000. Vectisol had earned his command in the Crithian purges of the outer reaches. He had not lost an engagement in 31 standard years. He listened to Ambassador Vass's statement a second time, played from the council relay. He listened to the report from intelligence. He listened to the recordings of Captain Thorn's transmissions. Then he keyed his command channel. All Dominion battle groups. Full mobilization. Target Valdrak system. Target the Earth Dreadnought Defiant Cause. We will be in jump range within 5 hours. There will be no negotiations. There will be no acceptance of surrender from the Earth vessel or her crew. Vectisol out. Across 51 star systems, the Crithian Dominion fleet woke from peacetime posture. The Defiant Cause's sensors registered the movements within minutes. Long-range arrays designed for exactly this scenario tracked drive signatures across light years. Commander Howaren brought the data to Captain Thorne. 87 capital ships and counting, sir. Multiple battle groups converging. Estimated time to system entry, 4 hours, 10 minutes. Thorne nodded. He had expected this. The decloaking of the Defiant Cause had been a calculated provocation, a stone dropped in a pond to see how high the water would rise. The water had risen as high as Earth had hoped it would. Open the encrypted relay to High Command. Channel open, sir. Thorne lifted his eyes to the small black lens of the relay camera. This is Captain Elias Thorne, Defiant Cause. The Dominion has committed to full mobilization. I am formally requesting the decloak order across all sister vessels. The window is now. A brief pause as the message traveled the long secure path back to Earth. The reply came in the form of a recorded voice, Fleet Admiral Yvonne Pereira, whose career had been spent building the very moment now unfolding. Captain Thorne, the decloak order is confirmed. All ships of the Cause class are released to operational mode. Stand to your duties. Earth stands with you. The channel closed. Across the Dominion's empire, in orbits above 22 major systems, at the staging yards of 7 fleet bases, above the home worlds of every council member, the universe shifted. Ships materialized. They did not appear all at once. They appeared in a pattern, a deliberate, choreographed cascade calibrated to be seen, calibrated to terrify. Above the Crithian home world of Threv Prime, the Earth Dreadnought Steadfast Resolve decloaked at High Orbital Station, her gun ports already open. Above the Dominion's primary fleet base at Vesh, the Dreadnought Iron Argument decloaked between 2 anchored battlecruisers, her shadow falling across the base below. Above Vectisol's personal estate world, the Dreadnought Patient Reward decloaked at 500 kilometers and held position. Civilian populations across the Dominion looked up at their skies and saw gray dreadnoughts where there had been empty heavens. The panic was as planned. In the council chamber, Thravanes received the reports in real time. He read them. He set his slate down with the careful movements of a man whose hands had begun to shake. He looked across the chamber at Ambassador Vass. "What do you want?" he asked. The arrogance had gone from his voice. What remained was the simple, practical question of a man trying to save what could be saved. Vass stood again. "We want," she said, "to be seen." The battles did not begin where the Council expected them to begin. Grand Admiral Vectisol had ordered his fleet to converge on Valdrak. He had assumed Valdrak was where the engagement would be fought. He had assumed wrong. While his battle groups burned toward the contested system at maximum sustainable acceleration, the Earth dreadnoughts above his fleet bases acted. They had not been positioned for show. They had been positioned for work. Above Vesh, the Iron Argument opened her batteries on the anchored Crithian capital ships. Anchored vessels with cold drives and empty magazines did not respond well to kinetic strikes. The Vesh fleet base lost 47% of its tonnage in the first 11 minutes. Above Threv Prime, the Steadfast Resolve did not fire on the home world. Earth had been clear with her captains on the matter of civilian centers. But she did fire on the orbital defense platforms ringing the planet. The platforms had been built to repel invasions of an earlier era and had not been refitted in 9 decades. They came apart in clean breaks. Across 22 systems, the pattern repeated. Earth ships decloaked in positions chosen years in advance, hit military targets that had been catalogued in detail by long-running infiltration programs no Dominion counterintelligence agency had detected. The Dominion's mobilization order had drawn the warships out of their bases and sent them toward Valdrak. Earth was now methodically destroying what had been left behind. In the council chamber, Ambassador Vass watched the reports come in. She did not gloat. She did not speak. She had said what she had come to say. Yenti sat beside her in the rear gallery. He had moved there in the chaos, and no one had stopped him. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I had hoped to be wrong." "I know," Vass said. I read your transcripts. They were generous to us. More generous than we deserved. You deserved warning, Yenti said. The galaxy denied it to you. The galaxy is being given the warning now. 3 star systems out from Valdrak, Grand Admiral Vectisol received the news of his fleet bases. He did not break formation. He did not turn around. To turn around now would be to abandon Valdrak to the defiant cause, and to confirm, in the eyes of the Council, that the Dominion had been broken in a single afternoon. He continued toward Valdrak. He chose to bet his career on a single engagement. He arrived in the system with 87 capital ships. The defiant cause was waiting. She was not alone. While the Dominion battle groups had burned toward Valdrak, 6 additional Earth dreadnoughts had decloaked at the system's outer edges. They had been there the entire time. The Valdrak engagement had been the bait. The Dominion fleet had taken it. Vectisol's tactical officer reported the new contacts. The Grand Admiral's mandibles did not click. He had passed beyond such gestures. Form battle line, he said. Engage the central dreadnought. We end this with our weight. The Crithian capital ships were not weak. Their plasma weapons were among the most refined in the local arm. Their armor was thick. Their crews were experienced. In any equitable contest, 87 against 7 would have been a near-certain victory. The contest was not equitable. Earth had designed her ships in private, in shipyards hidden inside hollowed asteroids, behind the bulk of gas giants, under the cover of 3 centuries of being underestimated. She had built her weapons to a specification the galaxy had never been allowed to read. She had trained her crews against simulations of the very fleets now bearing down on her. Captain Thorne opened the fleet channel. All cause-class vessels. Standard pattern. Discipline and patience. Earth is watching. The battle lasted 5 hours and 22 minutes. When it ended, Vectisol's flagship Pride of Threv was a drifting wreck. Her bridge was intact only because Earth wanted prisoners. Of the 87 Dominion capital ships that had entered Valdrak, 18 survived to surrender. The remainder were debris. In the council chamber, the reports arrived in real time. Thravanes sat in his high gallery and read them in silence. He did not look up. He did not speak. Beside him, his aide whispered the count of the dead. Thravanes closed his eyes. "Open the channel," he said. "Open the channel to the human ambassador. Open every channel. We will speak to Earth." The terms were drafted in 3 days. The Galactic Council, which had spent 5 centuries refining the procedures by which it conducted its business, found itself revising its rules of order in real time to accommodate the presence of a delegation that had, the day before, been classified as an observer. Earth's gallery was relocated from the rear of the chamber to the 3rd tier. Earth's voting privileges were granted on a unanimous voice motion that took less than 8 minutes to pass. The 5 delegations that had in past decades blocked every Earth motion brought to the floor did not speak during the vote. Ambassador Myra Vass accepted the elevation without ceremony. Captain Elias Thorne addressed the council on the 4th day after the engagement. He came in person. He wore his uniform, dark and unadorned save for the small silver pin of his command. He stood in the well of the chamber and spoke for 37 minutes. He did not gloat. He did not threaten. He spoke of 3 centuries of dismissal. He spoke of the deliberate quiet of a species that had decided, after watching the council operate, that the only way to ensure survival was to prepare in concealment and to be ready when concealment was no longer enough. He spoke of the cost. The 14,000 Crithian sailors who had died in the Valdrak engagement and across the system raids. The civilians who had not died, by Earth's choice, but whose lives had been altered by the gray dreadnoughts now in their skies. He spoke of how Earth would not seek empire. Earth would seek recognition. "We will not occupy your worlds," he said. "We will not garrison your stations. We will withdraw our ships from your orbits within 90 days, conditional on the Council's acceptance of 3 terms. He listed the terms. First, Earth would be recognized as a full member of the Council with voting privileges and committee assignments at the senior tier. Second, the Crithian Dominion would dissolve its claim on the Valdrak system and on 9 other contested systems where Earth held competing protests. The systems would be administered by a neutral commission until proper plebiscites could be conducted. Third, the Council would establish a permanent body, with Earth's participation, to ensure that no member polity could again build naval power in secret. The body would have inspection authority. The body would have Earth on its founding commission. He paused. He looked around the chamber. He met the eyes of High Speaker Thravanes, who had not slept in 4 days. "These terms are not negotiable," Thorne said. "They are also not punitive. We could ask for more. Earth has chosen not to. We do not desire the burden of empire. We desire the certainty of being seen. The galaxy has its answer. We will accept yours within 24 hours." The Council accepted within 16. Grand Admiral Vectisel was returned to Crithian space under flag of truce 3 weeks later. He had been treated with the formality due his rank. He had been allowed to write to his family during his captivity. When he stepped off the human transport onto the dock at Threv Prime, he was met by no honor guard. The Dominion had not yet decided what to do with him. He walked into the dock administrative office alone, sat down, and began to write his resignation. Ambassador Yenti died of natural causes 8 months after the Valdrak engagement. He had been 97 years old. His final speech to the Council, given 2 weeks before his death, was a request that the Chamber preserve in its permanent record the transcripts of every warning he had filed about humanity during his career. The Chamber voted to do so. The transcripts now form the opening text of the Council's standing curriculum on the consequences of dismissive diplomacy. Captain Thorne returned to his ship. The Defiant Cause did not stay in the Valdrak system. She rotated home for refit. Her sister vessels withdrew from Dominion space within the promised 90 days, each one slipping back into the dark from which she had emerged, each one carrying her crew home to families who had been told, in vague terms over a long span of years, that what their parents and partners and children did was important, and that one day the galaxy would learn its importance. The galaxy had learned. In the Crithian Dominion, the aftermath was brutal. High Speaker Thravanes resigned his position before the year's end. His final address to the Council was brief. "We were blind," he said. "We were warned. We chose not to listen. Let the record show that the failure was not in our intelligence. The failure was in our assumptions." The Dominion fleet was rebuilt, not to its former strength, but to a different standard. Earth's technical assistance, offered without condition, was accepted with a humility that would have been unthinkable before Valdrak. The first joint human-Crithian shipyard opened at Threv Prime 3 years later. It built cargo vessels. It built medical ships. It did not build dreadnoughts. The Neutral Commission, established to administer the contested systems, held its first session on a small station in the Valdrak asteroid belt. The commissioners were chosen from 7 species, none of them Crithian, none of them human. Their mandate was simple: determine, through free and fair vote, which systems would align with which polity, or choose independence. The first system to vote for independence was Valdrak itself. The second was a Crithian colony that had filed one of the original protests against Dominion rule. The third was a human frontier world that had never been formally recognized by the Council. By the end of the first year, 14 systems had chosen independence. Earth accepted the results. The Dominion accepted the results. The Council accepted the results. Something new was being built. On a small green hill outside the city of Geneva, 3 years after the Valdrak engagement, a girl of 10 stood with her grandfather and watched a transport ship rise from the spaceport at the foot of the valley. The transport was a civilian craft. It bore the markings of a passenger line. It carried tourists, traders, and students bound for a dozen worlds across what had once been Dominion territory, and was now neutral common space. The girl pointed. "Where is that one going, Grandpa?" The old man, who had served on the Defiant Cause as a young engineer, who had been on her command deck the day she decloaked in Valdrak, watched the transport climb into the blue. "Anywhere it wants to," he said. The girl smiled and lifted her face to the sky. Above her, in the high reach of the atmosphere, the daylight was bright and clear and full of the long roads humanity had earned. The galaxy had paid the price of ignorance. The bill, at last, was settled. But Ambassador Vass did not retire. She stayed at her post for another decade, watching the Council evolve, watching the alliances form, watching the old hierarchies crumble into something more equitable. She was present when the Council voted to expand its permanent membership, adding not only Earth, but 3 other species that had long been dismissed as observers. She was present when the inspection body, the one Earth had demanded, conducted its first unscheduled audit of a major fleet base. The base was Crithian. The inspection passed without incident. She was present, on a gray morning in Geneva, when Captain Thorne, now Admiral Thorne, came to her office to deliver a report. "The last of the Cause-class ships has been decommissioned," he said. "The Defiant Cause herself. She's being converted to a museum." Vass looked at him. "How do you feel about that?" Thorne considered the question. He was older now. His hair had gone gray at the temples. The silver pin of his command had been replaced with a small gold one, retired flag officer. "Relieved," he said. "We built those ships because we had to. We don't have to anymore. That's the point." Vass nodded. She looked out her window at the city below. The spaceport was busy. Ships came and went, human, Crithian, Delpha, a dozen others, on routes that had been closed for centuries. "They're still watching," Thorne said. "The Council. The other polities. They're watching to see if we become what we fought against." "Let them watch," Vass said. "We know what we are." She turned from the window. "Admiral, thank you for your service." Thorne saluted, a gesture that had, in the years since Valdrak, become common across a dozen species. "Thank you for yours, Ambassador." He left. Vass sat down at her desk. She opened a drawer. Inside was a small object, a fragment of hull plating from the Defiant Cause, given to her by the ship's crew on the day of her decommissioning. She picked it up. It was cool to the touch, matte gray, unremarkable. She put it back in the drawer and closed it. Outside, the transport ships rose and fell. The city hummed with the sound of a civilization that had found its place, not at the top of a hierarchy, not at the bottom, but somewhere in the middle, building something new. The galaxy had learned. The galaxy was still learning. And Earth, after 3 centuries of waiting, was finally seen. The museum opened on a cold November morning, 5 years after the Defiant Cause fired her last shot. The ship had been towed to a permanent orbit above Earth, her gray hull polished to a dull sheen, her gun ports welded shut, her kinetic launchers silent. Tourists filed through her corridors in guided groups. Children pressed their faces to the viewports where Captain Thorne had once watched enemy fleets burn. In the command deck, preserved exactly as it had been on the day of the Valdrak engagement, a holographic display cycled through the battle recordings. The voice of Captain Thorne played on a loop. "The hour has passed. I will now begin removing them." Visitors from a dozen species stood in silence, watching. Ambassador Vass attended the opening ceremony. She was 87 years old now, retired from the council, living in a small apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. She walked with a cane. Her iron-gray hair had gone white, but her eyes were as sharp as they had ever been. Admiral Thorne, retired, 73, grandfather of 4, stood beside her. They did not speak. They did not need to. The ceremony was brief. A Crithian diplomat offered a formal apology for the Dominion's actions before Valdrak. A Delpha representative read Yenthi's final speech. A human child, the granddaughter of a sailor who had died on the Defiant Cause, cut a ribbon made of blue and gold. The crowd applauded. The ship's engines, cold for years, did not respond. Afterward, Vass and Thorne walked through the corridors together. The crowds had thinned. The lights were dim. They stopped at the viewport that faced toward Earth. "Do you ever miss it?" Vass asked. Thorne looked at the planet below, blue and white and green, turning slowly against the black. "I miss the certainty," he said. "The clarity. You knew what you had to do. There was no question. And now—" He smiled. "Now there are nothing but questions. That's better. That's peace." Vass nodded. She turned from the viewport. "I should go. My granddaughter is making dinner. She's gotten quite good at it, actually. She learned from a Crithian cookbook." Thorne laughed. "The galaxy is strange." "The galaxy is wonderful," Vass said. "We just had to survive long enough to see it." They walked to the airlock together. Thorne helped her with the suit seals. Old habit, old care. When they stepped onto the transfer shuttle, Vass looked back at the Defiant Cause one last time. The ship hung in the black, silent and still. "Thank you," she said quietly. Not to Thorn. To the ship. The shuttle doors closed. They descended toward Earth. That night, Vass sat at her dinner table with her granddaughter, a girl of 22, studying xenobiology at the University of Geneva. The girl had never known a time when Earth was not respected. She had never known a time when the Council did not listen. She had grown up in the peace that Valdrak had purchased. "Grandma," she said, "tell me about the war." Vass set down her fork. She looked at her granddaughter's face, earnest, curious, unafraid. "There was no war," she said. "There was an hour. There was a ship. There were people who had been waiting a very long time to be seen. But the history books say." "The history books are written by people who weren't there," Vass said gently. "I was there. There was no war. There was a moment when the galaxy looked at us and finally understood that we had never been asking for permission. We had been asking for attention." The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think it will happen again? Another Valdrak?" Vass thought about it. She thought about the Council's inspection body, still functioning after 5 years. She thought about the joint shipyards, the cultural exchanges, the students who traveled between worlds as easily as she had once traveled between council sessions. "No," she said. "I think we learned. I think they learned. I think that's what peace is, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding." The girl smiled. "That sounds like a speech." "It was," Vass said. "I gave it 20 years ago. It was better then." They finished dinner. The dishes were cleared. The sun set over the lake. And somewhere above them, in the cold black of orbit, the defiant cause drifted through her eternal patrol, not a weapon, not a threat, but a reminder. The hour had passed. The galaxy had answered. And Earth, after 3 centuries of waiting, was finally home. In the years that followed, the Council expanded again. New species joined. Old rivalries faded. The inspection body discovered no hidden fleets, not because none existed, but because the polities of the local arm had learned that secrecy was no longer necessary. The defiant cause remained in orbit. Schoolchildren visited on field trips. They touched the cold metal of her hull. They stood on her command deck and heard the voice of a captain who had once given an ultimatum. "You will withdraw your forces from this system within 1 standard hour." They did not understand, fully, what those words had meant. They had not lived through the centuries of dismissal. They had not known the weight of being unseen. But they would learn. And they would remember. Because the hour had passed. The ships had decloaked. The galaxy had seen. And nothing, nothing, would ever be the same. 30 years after the Valdrak engagement, the Galactic Council convened in a new chamber. The old one had been demolished. Too many memories, too much weight. The new hall was circular, with no rear gallery, no observer tier, no elevated seats. Every delegation sat at the same level. Every voice carried the same distance. Earth's seat was no longer at the back. It was not at the front, either. It was simply one among many, exactly where humanity had always wanted to be. Ambassador Myra Vass did not attend the opening session. She was 117 years old, living in a small village in the Swiss Alps, surrounded by photographs and books and the quiet pride of a life fully lived. But she watched the live stream on her tablet, the screen propped against a teacup. A Crithian delegate spoke first. Then a Delpha. Then a human, a young woman named Soraya Thorn, granddaughter of the Admiral, who had followed her family's path into diplomacy. She spoke of cooperation, of shared futures, of the long road from Valdrak to this moment. Vass smiled. She remembered when Thorn had been a captain with a steady voice and an hour to change everything. Now his granddaughter was finishing the work. The session ended. The tablet went dark. Vass looked out her window at the mountains. Her door chimed. "Come in," she said. Admiral Elias Thorn, very old now, very thin, leaning on a cane, walked through the door. He took the chair across from her without being asked. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had seen too much to need many words. "They named a school after you," he said finally. "On Threv Prime. The Myra Vass Academy for Diplomatic Studies." Vass laughed. "That's ridiculous. It's deserved." She shook her head. "I just sat in a room and told the truth. You're the one who fired the guns. I fired the guns because you bought the time. Thorn leaned back. We did it together. That's the point. Outside, snow began to fall. The mountains faded into white. Vass reached over and took Thorn's hand. It was cold, but steady. Do you ever wonder, she said, what would have happened if you had given them 2 hours instead of 1? Thorn was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, they would have used the extra hour to call for more ships. We would have waited. We would have won. But more people would have died. And if you had given them 30 minutes, they would have panicked, made mistakes. Some of their commanders might have fired out of fear. The battle would have been uglier. We still would have won. But it would have cost. Vass nodded. So 1 hour was exactly right. 1 hour was exactly right, Thorn agreed. They sat in silence as the snow fell. The tea grew cold. The fire crackled in the hearth. Are you afraid? Vass asked. Of what? Of being forgotten. Thorn looked at her. His eyes were pale now, faded with age, but the steadiness was still there, the same steadiness that had faced 87 warships and not blinked. I'm not afraid of being forgotten, he said. I'm afraid of being remembered wrong. I don't want to be a statue. I want to be a lesson. A lesson in what? That patience is not weakness. That silence is not surrender. That being underestimated is the greatest gift an enemy can give you, because it means they're not watching. And when they're not watching, you can build. Vass squeezed his hand. They're watching now. Let them watch, Thorn said. We're not hiding anymore. That night, Myra Vass dreamed of the council chamber, the old one, with its high ceiling and its rear gallery and its observer seats. She dreamed of standing to speak, of the silence that followed her words, of the moment when the galaxy finally turned to look. She woke to sunlight on her face. The snow had stopped. The mountains were clear. On her bedside table, a small fragment of gray hull plating caught the light. She touched it, once, and smiled. Then she got up, made tea, and began the work of another day. Because the work never ended. That was not a tragedy. That was a gift. The galaxy had learned. The galaxy was still learning. And she was still here, still watching, still building. The hour had passed. The ships had decloaked. The war had not come. That was the victory. That was everything.